Before Tomb Raider and Uncharted, we had Rick Dangerous, a total love letter to some of my favourite films of all time. Of course, Indiana Jones. You will cry, you will rage, you will curse whilst holding onto your joystick with sweat subtly leaking between your fingers. Yes, dear lords, this game is a tough game and has always been infamous for bringing a platforming challenge. Most definitely one of the toughest games around from that era of gaming. The people behind this game was Core Design. It was largely published by Microprose on their Firebird label in the UK, and for America's release this was on the Microplay label, and for the Spanish release this was published by Urbe. Speaking of Tomb Raider, it was Core Design who also developed that game later on, so the team clearly had a love for Indiana Jones and added its own unique twist to things. So as for the ports, I will only discuss the original releases here, released in the late 1980s. Any remasters and fan games will not be included, such as Rick X and the enhanced Amiga game, which is actually what you are watching now in the gameplay. I will mention here though, the Sam Coupe had a conversion in 2021 and the Acon Archimedes also had a 1995 release, which was a fan game. So today we are going through every version of Rick Dangerous and finding the best version of it. You have no fear, although this is a 1980s game and it has Rick in the title, you will find no Rick rolling here, only when we are escaping rolling rocks in the caves. We are kicking this video off today with the ZX Spectrum version. I will state here that personally I don't think Rick Dangerous actually had a really awful version. They are all very playable games across all platforms, but we must remain focused and look for nitpickers in situations like this. So I'll be honest, I did find the Spectrum's conversion a little difficult to see things such as baddies in this game. One example was a bat that hides away, which admittedly is difficult to see here compared with other versions, but Spectrum's version just seems that much more difficult to see here. I have said before, and I will say again, I adore the ZX Spectrum. It's totally a staple of British computing history, but Rick Dangerous is a tough game in the first place, and so to make it a little more punishing, it's just pure sadism. I think it is likely that kids who had this on Spectrum would likely have suffered more tantrums than kids owning it on different platforms at the time. Control wise, it's fine, just like other ports, a very simple case of pressing up and fire to shoot and down and fire to place dynamite. It looks nice enough for a Spectrum game. If you love these Color Clash games, you love them. If you don't, then I understand why. Overall, a decent but challenging version of Rick. The Amstrad CPC's version is a great version of our indie-inspired adventure. It's clearly a Mode Zero program game and this looks awesome. Those nice and bright, vibrant colours and contrasts really poke out at you with this version. Some other versions give us a little animation before the game begins along with the storyline. The Amstrad CPC version doesn't have an animation but just text. Something else's version fails to have its music as the stages begin. Now remember, Rick Dangerous was pretty much released on several platforms at once, so really the question is, did this actually work without music playing as Rowan Rock is chasing us down the cave, or was it great without music? So, as to be expected, the Amstrad CPC version is an unforgiven death fest version, which doesn't let you off for anything. When a baddie hits you, they truly mean it. So, collision detection is perfect here. Going back to audio, some versions sounds like it has a wah sample when Rick dies. This version doesn't, so again, really a preference. It controls really nicely, and like I say, looks really nice too. When falling down into cave falls, there is some noticeable frame drops, but really, the gameplay itself is largely single screen, and so the Amstrad CPC handles it fairly well. Apart from those times when we are falling, that is, it's pretty responsive too when shooting. Overall, it's a decent version of Rick Dangerous. The Commodore 64 could really pull off some great games if left in the right hands. Creatures, Limbo's Quest, Mayhem in Monsterland, and so many more. Rick Dangerous by Firebirds for this system is a little like one of those games. High quality and something worth knowing that your Commodore 64 was still super cool, even in 1989 when this released. Really, who needed a Commodore Amiga with C64 still being flooded with quality games like this one? So in terms of Rick Dangerous or Commodore 64, this is a great one for sure. It is utilising a SID chip to give us a quality sounding start screen and introduction music, and sounds really fresh and full of life here. It is fairly colourful, but let's be honest, many Commodore 64 games did have that dull colour look. Now, don't think I'm criticising the Commodore 64, I am a lifelong fan complete with Commodore tattoo and the owner of an Ultimate 2 cartridge. In fact, I was actually a publisher once. Look up Flimsoft on Google for that. Going back to the game then, the sprite of Rick is really detailed and outlines well too. Enemies, on the other hand, don't actually look that great. A huge noticeable difference there. In terms of frame rates, this is smooth as silk and is very responsive. The Commodore 64 version even has footstep sounds. Really, what else could you ask for? Now, this was a tough call between this IBM PC compatible version and the Commodore 64 version. Although the DOS game doesn't sound as good, the game itself looks much fresher with more vibrant colours than the Commodore 64's version. So yes, sure, the game does sound very much like a DOS game, pretty annoying that is. The sprites and details in those sprites and the cave itself with the Amazon stage is much more defined here, whereas Commodore 64's version was using that almost faded look with its colours, which couldn't be helped as that was a hardware limitation with its colour palette. Rick Dangerous is also very smooth, which is something of a rarity for a DOS game from what I have played in my 40 plus ranking series. We also get a nice opening for the Amazon stage with storyline, which also comes with an animated display. We have a couple of different visual modes to be used in this version, as most DOS games have this. I used the best possible video output here. It's at this point I was really jumping out my seat when hearing that I had just died with that loud sound effects. For those of you who know the moment of despair with this game, when you hear that noise, it really doesn't matter. It is just, after all, a game. So yes, the Atari ST version is pretty damn good. Sprite design and the level of detail here is definitely top notch. The game opens up with Rick Dangerous animated looking image, and this looks clean and highly polished. A really nice presentation before the game begins with a really nice animated scene above the storyline. This game runs really smoothly even when falling. I have noticed in my ranking series that many Atari ST games at times struggle with scrolling, but not here, not at all. The game is really responsive, and when planting dynamite it sounds very good. A little on the 8-bit sounding side to be honest, but most Atari ST games did have that sound anyways. It's a fairly bright looking game and it's very fluid to play. Sprite collision is just like any other Rick Dangerous version and is top notch. This game is just well designed, and ST users would have thought a lot of this version back in 1989. A great Atari ST game and right up there with some of the best ST games ever. And I'm guessing many of you actually knew this was coming, but here it is. I've ranked the Commodore Amiga's version in first place. So this is virtually the same as the Atari ST's version, only the colours just look a slight darker here, which gives textures a little more definition in places. The audio side of things also made this, in my opinion, the best version of Rick Dangerous. An example of his superior sounds can be heard throughout the game. The Commodore Amiga could play multiple sound effects simultaneously here, and so when shooting and then dying with a split second, you can still hear the sound of the gunshot echo through the cave. Controller wise, with the Amiga's version, it's pretty much on par with the ST's. Like I say, it's literally or appears to be the same game, only with this version's audio in colours being slightly better. In 2022, a clever person produced Rick Dangerous enhanced for AGA Amiga Amigas or Amiga 1200s, as well as the Amiga CD32, which I covered at the time. That builds on Rick Dangerous for Commodore Amiga, but kind of modernising it with backgrounds added and graphics and sprites getting an overhaul. And this was actually played at the start of the video, so if you're interested in this and how it looks, just remember to go back to the introduction of this video and you'll see gameplay of it. It's also very easy to find on Google too. So that's it for ranking all of those awesome ports of Rick Dangerous today. So like I mentioned in the video, I don't think there was actually a really awful version of Rick Dangerous, just different styles to it. And of course all this goes down to hardware capabilities. What version of Rick Dangerous did you play on back in the day? And do you ever recall a particular meltdown playing Rick Dangerous back in the day? As always, drop a line in the comments and let us know. And do you actually agree that the Amiga deserved top spot here? Just out of curiosity. But anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.